Coming up on this week's FAS TV, we are in Banff, Aberdeenshire with Elaine Wilson, a third-generation farmer at Gellyhill Farm. After stepping away from farming to have a career as a PE teacher, Elaine returned to the farm 10 years ago when she inherited the business, and she has made changes to improve efficiency. A significant change has been doubling the number of cattle fattened each year, investing in the arable side.
I've grown up on the family farm. I have always had a keen interest in farming, but Dad always kind of said that the farm would always be here for me. So I went away after school and did a degree in PE teaching at the University of Edinburgh. I then taught for a year in the school. However, I soon realised that I enjoyed teaching, but I love farming. So I decided then to come back to the farm. Fast forward 6 months on from that, in May 2014, my dad's cousin Ian died, and then I subsequently inherited the farms in the business here. So at the age of 24, I was kind of catapulted into the deep end, and all of a sudden I see myself not only helping out, but having to run everything. So fast forward sort of 10 years, I'm running 2 businesses from here. Burnside Farming is my cattle enterprise here. So I'm buying in heifer, weaned and store calves from Dingwall and Highland Marts, and I take them right through until finishing. Everything goes to Scott Beef and Inverurie. I also have the arable operation run through Elaine Wilson and Sons, farming just over 1,850 acres in total. Predominantly the focus is on growing 900 acres of spring barley, and if it meets specification, all that's destined for malting purposes. We also grow about 160 acres of feed barley every year, winter barley, which we then feed to the cattle here. We keep all our own straw. I also grow winter wheat, oilseed rape, and the rest of the acres is made up from grass, which is used for silage or for grazing the cattle. So there's a lot going on. Everything's run by a small but dedicated team of myself, and I've got 2 full-time members of staff, but I'm lucky enough to have the help of other people at key busy times who are always willing to help out, because there's just never enough hands on deck when it's all go. Recently, over the last year and a half, I've doubled my herd numbers here. So when I took over the farm, there was about 300 cattle brought on farm being finished, but everything sort of finished at the same time, and all the fat were going away at the same time. And really it was a hit or a miss what the beef price was at that time. Whereas now I've doubled my numbers, so I've now got 600 here. So this is just a relatively new thing that I've done through different investments that I've done. So going forward, I would say the aim now is to have a more regular flow of fat cattle going off farm. So if I can get fat cattle off farm every month, I can hopefully try and obtain a good average for the cattle that I've got. Once the cattle are fat, they have to go off. I can't keep them. It doesn't make financial sense. So I can't wait another month for the beef price maybe to go up. It's such a volatile market. So therefore I think about trying to focus on getting a good average in cattle going out throughout the year. As a result of that, I'm now trying to replenish my stocks with stores constantly throughout the year. I still buy the majority of my weaned calves in autumn at the back end. Everything is bought from Dingwall and Highland Marts. It's a great mart up there, really friendly. You get a good relationship with the auctioneers and the sellers, and they're always keen to know how their calves are doing. So everything that's being bought is heifer, young weaned calves. They are all coming from the north, the west coast or the islands. So for me, I think it works well in our business structure, because what you see is what you get with these calves. The calves are, when they come in the ring, they are just a product of good breeding and spending the summer out with their mums out in the grass. They've not been intensively crep fed. So what you see is what you get. I think this helps that when they do come home, it's a shock to the system, them being spent from their mothers. But I think it helps when they're kind of here, they've grown, they're ready just to hit the road running. So when they come here, they're ready to get on to the complete diet that I feed them. They get fed once a day, the diet feeder. That consists of silage, barley and draff. I think as well, the cattle coming from the west coast and the north, they're just a little bit more hardier, whether they've been exposed to maybe harsher weather climates out there on the west coast, perhaps not the best at grazing, but the calves are there, they're ready to grow. And I think looking back from experience, buying calves from there doesn't prevent pneumonia, but I think from experience you can see that there's maybe less incidences of pneumonia because the cattle are a little bit hardier and they're able to cope with the stress of coming away from their mums and acclimatising into my finishing unit here. I kind of would say that maybe perhaps aesthetically the calves are not necessarily what people would have an ideal image of what a good beef calf looks like, but I kind of look beyond the aesthetics, look at the frame, look at the potential, look at the length of the cattle and see what they could be. And after doing this for so many years, you know how the cattle are going to turn out, so it's important to look past sort of maybe the coarse fur, maybe they look a little bit empty, but I know if they come home onto the diet here that they can turn out like this. When I buy the weaned calves in the autumn, they're typically coming home about 6 months. Average weight can vary between 250 to 300 kilos, maybe even slightly less. So they really need a lot of looking after to try and get them home and get acclimatised to the new way of they are here. When the cattle come home, the first thing we do is we vaccinate them. They get Risperdal intranasal, they get IBR, and they get wormed as well. Everything that's bought remains in batches. This buying in sort of dribs and drabs is not for me, taking home cattle and mixing them week on week. So when I go to the mart to buy them, I'm really focused on just getting a batch of cattle to fill a quart and they stay together just to try and improve and make sure that they remain as healthy as possible. So when they do come home, I call it a babysitting period because they do need a lot of looking after, seeing if they're onto their food. We try and keep them well bedded in these ventilated quarts, and if there is anything showing signs of illness, we try and nip it in the bud as early as we can and isolate them into individual pens before returning them to the rest. The calves are then in the summer, sort of the lightest ones, they will go out to the grass and they are grazed and then they will come back in and get finished after that. Everything else will remain inside and get fed throughout the summer. We're aiming to try and get everything finished by a maximum 24 months, younger if possible. We're aiming for projected, I like to get them off farm here, maybe when we weigh them, they're approximately about 650 kilos. That's a good indication, but I try and use a combination of weighing them to project what they're going to be their kill-out weights so we don't get penalised, but at the same time as well, I'm kind of a bit old-fashioned and there's nothing better than just actually having a good old look at the cattle and visually seeing if they're fat. Just because of the weigh, it doesn't necessarily mean that they are fat, or you can get ones that maybe are not hitting the weight, but little Aberdeen Anguses, they will be fat before a big Charolais heifer, and you don't want them to be over fat and get a 5 and be penalised. So I think the West Coast calves, the farmers have been really conscious in trying to improve their breeding and produce good calves using good stock bulls, and I think it's evident that when they come home here, get onto a good diet, they do finish well. So everything's being killed out to R and U grades, and a very high proportion of the cattle here are actually grading out at U, so that's just really testament to the breeding that's there from the start. These cattle here were just bought at the anniversary sale up at Dingwall Highland Marts in the middle of July. So they all averaged about 391 kilos. This is only the second year that I've bought forward stores at this time of the year. But again, it's just all to do with keeping the turnover going, taking more cattle on farm. I had an empty quart and I'm lucky to have the food and the straw here for them. So I found last year it really helped getting a batch home early, get them onto their food, and it was just one less batch of cattle having to nurse in the back end, which I think helps because I've got so much going on. If I can get a batch settled, every little helps. So I found that these ones were sort of similar to what I paid last year for them. Store cattle is obviously a tremendous trade, even though we've no idea what we're getting for the fat. But like my average for these, I paid 2.95 pence a kilo for these. I think the sale average was about 285, so again I felt comfortable paying for this, and hopefully they can hit the road running, and before you know it they'll be fat like the ones over there. So I think one of the main challenges going forward with my business, and the fact that at the moment I'm just buying heifers, is the fact that there is a reduction in the Scotland's beef herd. There was a 2.7% decrease in calf registrations last year alone, so it certainly indicates that there is going to be a tightening in the supply available. So obviously I think I probably noticed that last year as well. Just at the marts I was maybe going home comparing year on year, slightly less cattle being bought to each sale, just showing that there is a reduction, and primarily that's because a lot of farmers were taking advantage of the strong cull cow price. But inevitably it is a worry, because then going forward there's just going to be an increased price competition to get the cattle. Therefore I may have to consider going forward looking at whether I don't just buy heifers, maybe have to look at buying stots. But again, that then involves different diets, different kill out rates. There's a lot to consider, and I think as well just it's trying to weigh it all up, because obviously there's a lot of volatility in the beef price. When we're buying these young weaned calves, it's a long keep. You don't know what you're paying for that day, what you're going to get in a year to 15 months time for that calf. So it's trying to balance up, I think, me needing numbers and trying to maintain my numbers, but at the same time not paying through the roof for the cattle and then not be left with anything in between. It would be easier with a crystal ball, but we don't have that. But at the end of the day, it's my livelihood and it's a business and it has to make financial sense. So that might be an option, having to look into buying stots to maintain numbers, but at the same time not cripple myself financially just to get the numbers that I need.
An important change for Elaine has been installing a fixed handling system, which has made cattle handling more efficient and provided important safety for Elaine and her team.
Here we're standing in one of my main investments that I've done in the last year or so, and that's installing this fixed handling system here. Previously we would have been standing in the old dairy here in the milking parlour, but it was just dead space. But now it's in a central location with courts either side. It's a perfect place to install this. It's really been a total game changer for us. Before we had quite a labour intensive process of having to handle cattle. That would have seen us having to put in a crate, mobile handling gates, set it up in one court, take it all down, and then probably the next week set it up somewhere else. And there's just less people going about the farm. We've got a lot going on the arable side as well. So I think it's really important to try and make the business as efficient and as safe as possible. So here it's so easy for cattle when they come on farm. We can run them through the crate here. They can get weighed, vaccinated, wormed. Anything that we need to do, we can do it here. We've got lots of separate pens that we can use for batching the animals. Later in the year we like to reweigh them and batch them off according to size. It gives them all a better chance to thrive better if they're all kind of a little bit more uniformed in their sizes. So I think ultimately as well it's far less stressful on the animal because everything's here, they just sort of run through. It's a very quick and simple process. It's safe for the animal and ultimately it's safe for myself and my staff working here.
The Aral Business plays the key role of self-sufficiency for the cattle fattening business. Barley is grown for malting and feeding, with all straw remaining on farm for bedding purposes.
The biggest challenge I faced when I took over the business back in 2014, I think only being 24, I'd been used to helping out. I knew the day-to-day tasks such as feeding, looking after the cattle, but very quickly I realised I needed to get my head around the actual business side of the farm. At the end of the day, this is my livelihood. I've got to make it work. I have to make it work for my employees I've got here. So it took a lot for me to then get my head around things like accounts, VAT returns, tax returns, all this sort of things that maybe people don't think about, cash flows, dealing with banks, things like that. It was really important and it took me a while to get my head around that, but I'm glad I did because it just helps you to understand the business a lot better. And I think one of the other main things I had to really focus on was improving my knowledge of the arable side of the business. I'd always, growing up, had a keen interest and heavily involved in the cattle side of things, but basically I was a beginner here in the crops, so I really had to gain knowledge from my agronomist and take advice and just listen and learn about when crops should be sprayed, what we're spraying them for, when and why. Things now I take for granted, like planning crop rotations, types of fertiliser to order, when to order, seed rates, different varieties. It's kind of all second nature now, but at the time it was really a lot to take in, and I think it was quite stressful at the time looking back, but if you're committed and just put in the hard work, things do become a lot easier. And I think looking back, I would say before I would have just been surviving each day and getting to the end of each day and probably each day being quite stressed with things and worrying, whereas now sort of things come a little bit more natural, and I think hopefully the farm and myself are more thriving rather than just surviving. So another key investment that I've been undertaking in is the installation of a new grain dryer and grain store here at Mountbletton. The old dryer simply was not fit for purpose. The capacity of grain that these combines can now cut in a glorious day. The old dryer was about 40 years old. It still works, but it just can't dry the volumes and the tonnages that we're wanting to go through now. So hopefully this is going to make the process at harvest far more efficient. We can handle the grain better. It's given us far more space here as well. I think another key benefit to that would have to be the fact that now we can dry the barley as it comes off the combine, and we can store it until it's time for it to be moved off for malting. We don't have to risk it lying wet for long. We can handle the grain, process it and store it, which gives us a lot more options and ensure we still produce quality barley. I think it's been a really wet year all in all, so I think the way the weather's been going, it's quite mixed. So I've got a feeling that this new dryer, which is hopefully going to be finished this week, ready for the start of August, is going to be very useful and probably come into its own this year if we continue to get such a varied weather.
In 2023, Elaine was nominated for the Royal Northern Agricultural Society, RNAS, Good Farming Practice Awards.
Last year I was lucky enough to be nominated for the Royal Northern Agricultural Society's Good Farm Practice Award. It came totally out of the blue, and to this day I still don't know who actually nominated me, so when they say they're treated confidentially, they certainly do. The whole process was really good to be involved in, and it was very simple. After accepting the nomination, I simply had to fill in a form and just give a little bit of backstory of who I am, what I do. Following that, there was an on-farm visit from the judge, who was keen just to see what I do here and delve a little deeper into what I do and my future plans. Following on from that, I was lucky enough to be shortlisted, and the top 3 was then invited along to their annual awards lunch at the end of November last year. And although I was a runner-up to worthy winners, Craig and Claire Grant, it was a really good experience to be part of. I think 10 years on from taking over the farm, it really helped for me to reflect and see how far myself and the farm has come, and it was really a good experience to be involved in, and if anyone's got the chance to get involved with that, then they should. I think going forward, my future plans would be to perhaps repair some existing old roofs and replace them on cattle courts that are not being used at the moment. That would again allow me to slightly increase cattle numbers again. I'm lucky enough to be self-sufficient in my straw, my silage, my barley. So again, that would put all that to good use, and then it would really just maximise the full potential of my existing infrastructure before I think of doing anything more and expanding further. But I think in agriculture you kind of have to be proactive rather than reactive, so I would always want to just keep growing in confidence, learning. I know I've came a long way, but I think you can continually learn, but I'd want to just keep ahead and embrace all the technology that's out there. If there's new things that can make things more efficient, save time, then I'd want to grab the opportunity with that, whether it's GPS and the tractors, We already use varied lime application, but whether it's going down that sort of route with fertiliser, that again is something that I'm open to and something I'd want to try and do, and rather than just sitting back and waiting for things to happen. We don't have a crystal ball in agriculture, and there's so much different things that affect us. Worldwide grain markets, ferret prices, pandemics, you name it. We don't know what we're going to be faced with, but I think just trying to be vigilant and see what's happening and trying to predict where the business needs to be, that's really all I'd want to do, and just continue to thrive with myself and enjoy what I'm doing ultimately.